When the lights dimmed and the cameras rolled, the tension in the air was unmistakable. The debate stage was packed with anticipation, every seat filled, every viewer at home leaning forward. Kellyanne Conway, with her practiced smile and cutting tone, seized the microphone first. She wasted no time, leaning into the spotlight with a remark clearly designed not to argue policy but to wound. She turned toward Jasmine Crockett and said with deliberate sharpness, "Some people here think passion makes up for lack of substance. They shout, they posture, they try to look bold. But at the end of the day, the American people deserve more than theatrics. They deserve truth." The line was dripping with contempt, meant to reduce Crockett from a forceful congresswoman to nothing more than an angry performer. The audience gasped. Some laughed nervously, others applauded, but everyone knew exactly what Conway was doing, trying to humiliate Crockett in front of millions. It was not a debate point, it was a dagger thrown in public. Commentators on the live stream whispered in disbelief as the words landed, already predicting that this moment would dominate headlines. For a second, Crockett said nothing. The silence was electric. Conway mistook it for hesitation and pressed harder, smirking as she leaned closer to the microphone. "You see? Nothing to say when called out. Nothing but slogans and sound bites. This is what happens when style meets reality." Her words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating and heavy. Supporters of Conway roared approval from their seats, clapping and nodding as if their champion had already won the night. On social media, clips of Conway's remark were being clipped and shared within seconds. Hashtags began forming, mocking Crockett, portraying her as silenced, undone, finished before she could even begin. But in that silence, Crockett was calculating. She had faced worse than Conway's attempt at humiliation. She had been underestimated before, dismissed as loud, fiery, emotional, and every time she had found a way to turn the narrative, her pause was not weakness. It was the calm before the storm. Then she leaned forward, and in a voice steady but edged with steel, she answered with a single phrase, "I'd rather fight loud for the people than whisper lies to protect the powerful." The line cut through the air like a blade. The room shifted. The audience, which had moments earlier been tilting toward Conway, now erupted with cheers and applause. Conway blinked. She had expected Crockett to fumble, to lash out wildly, to prove her point about style over substance. Instead, Crockett had reframed the attack, turning it into an indictment of Conway's entire career. The debate had barely begun, and already the stage was crackling with energy. Commentators struggled to keep up, their voices rising as they realized a viral moment had just been born. Crockett had absorbed the insult, flipped it, and fired back with a line that would be replayed again and again across every network before the night was over. The debate was no longer just about policies. It was about who could command the moment, who could bend the narrative to their will. And with her first words, Crockett had shown that she was not only ready for Conway's attacks, she was ready to own them. The cameras panned across the stage, capturing the two women locked in a contest that was bigger than either of them alone. Kellyanne Conway, seasoned strategist and longtime defender of Donald Trump, carried decades of political scars and triumphs. She knew the rhythms of media combat, the way to craft sound bites that lived long after the lights went down. For years, she had thrived in hostile arenas, turning interviews and debates into spectacles where she emerged seemingly unshaken. Tonight, she walked onto the stage with that same confidence, convinced she could dismantle Jasmine Crockett with practiced ease. Jasmine Crockett, however, was no ordinary opponent. A rising star known for her fierce rhetoric and uncompromising defense of justice, she had built her reputation on standing tall against those who underestimated her. She was unapologetically loud, unflinching, and often accused of being too much by her detractors. But to her supporters, that intensity was her weapon, a fire that cut through hypocrisy and laid bare uncomfortable truths. To face Conway, a figure many saw as the embodiment of polished spin and manipulation, was not a risk, it was an opportunity. The debate stage itself became a character. The bright lights, the rows of cameras, the hushed audience waiting for sparks. It was a theater of power where reputations could be made or shattered in a matter of seconds. Every gesture, every glance, every phrase was magnified, dissected, replayed, and judged by millions both inside the hall and across living rooms nationwide. Conway positioned herself as the veteran. She carried notes, rehearsed lines, and the aura of someone who had played this game before. She smiled, but it was the smile of someone who believed she already held the advantage. Crockett, by contrast, brought energy that pulsed like electricity. She leaned in without notes, her confidence rooted not in rehearsed talking points but in conviction. She didn't need to read from cards. Her words were her weapon, sharpened by countless confrontations on the House floor and in front of cameras that thrived on her sound bites. Viewers online could feel the contrast instantly. The live chat of the stream was divided, with Conway supporters cheering her calculated strikes and Crockett's base waiting for their champion to unleash the comebacks they knew she carried. Memes were already being drafted before either woman had finished their first lines. The clash was not just political, it was cultural. A generational divide, a battle between polished establishment spin and raw, unapologetic defiance. Commentators framed the stakes in real time. If Conway succeeded, it would reaffirm her power as a media tactician and reassert the dominance of Trump-era veterans. But if Crockett triumphed, it would mark her ascension into the top tier of voices who could command national attention and shape the conversation. For Conway, the debate was about control. For Crockett, it was about breaking control apart. As the moderators tried to steer the discussion back to policy, it was obvious neither woman cared about the question at hand. The real contest was rhetorical combat. Every issue, economy, healthcare, governance, was merely a battlefield where each strike was meant not just to win an argument, but to create a viral moment that would ripple far beyond the stage. In the audience, whispers grew louder. Some were shocked at Conway's attempt to humiliate Crockett so early. Others waited eagerly for Crockett to answer in kind. On Twitter, journalists tapped furiously, already predicting headlines. The debate had become more than an exchange of views. It was a clash of styles, of legacies, of two very different visions of power. The moderators turned to Conway for her first substantive answer, but she was no longer speaking to the question. She leaned into the microphone, eyes locked on Crockett, and delivered a line that seemed crafted to sting. Congresswoman Crockett talks a big game about integrity, but let's be honest. Where was her integrity when she voted lockstep with party bosses, when she defended scandals instead of confronting them? She hides behind outrage because outrage is easier than leadership. The words echoed, biting and personal. The crowd stirred, some nodding, some booing, but all waiting for Crockett's reply. Conway had made her move, doubling down with precision. This was not the vague jab of the opening remark. This was an accusation meant to paint Crockett as hypocritical, a puppet of her party rather than a leader of principle. Crockett did not flinch. She leaned forward and met Conway's gaze with the intensity that had become her trademark. Her response came sharp, deliberate, and unforgettable. The difference between you and me is simple. I fight for my people, you fight for your paycheck. Every time you bend the truth to protect the powerful, you betray the very voters you claim to speak for. The audience erupted. Cheers and applause rolled through the hall, drowning out the moderators who tried to restore order. Conway smirked, pretending the reaction did not rattle her, but her voice carried a new edge when she shot back. Oh, please, spare us the dramatics. You've mastered slogans, I'll give you that. But slogans won't fix a broken country. Slogans won't secure our borders or protect our families. What you call fighting, I call theater. Crockett leaned in again, her voice rising above the noise. Theater! You would know about theater. You've built a career defending a president whose every day was a performance. And every time you smiled on camera while the truth was burned behind you, that wasn't leadership, that was manipulation. The crowd gasped. The exchange was no longer about policy, it was about character. Conway, visibly irritated, snapped back. And what exactly have you accomplished? Yelling in committee hearings? Posting sound bites on social media? You're a performer, Congresswoman, nothing more. Crockett answered with fire. If demanding truth is performance, then I will never apologize for it. And if calling out corruption makes me loud, then I will stay loud until the lies stop. Because unlike you, I don't answer to billionaires in back rooms. I answer to the people who sent me here. The roar of the crowd shook the room. Conway's attempts to frame Crockett as a hollow performer had instead handed Crockett the stage. The debate moderators struggled to steer the conversation back, but the duel between the two women consumed everything. On social media, the clash went viral in real time. Clips of Crockett's defiance flooded Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, each one captioned with lines that electrified her supporters. "I fight for my people, you fight for your paycheck." Hashtags exploded. Conway's base tried to fight back, painting Crockett as unhinged, but the tide of online reaction was undeniable. Crockett was commanding the conversation. In newsrooms across the country, producers were already clipping sound bites for the late-night shows. The conflict was no longer just a debate. It was a cultural flashpoint. One woman trying to preserve the old guard, the other ripping it down word by word. And every exchange brought the night closer to a breaking point that neither could avoid. The moderators, sensing the duel had overtaken the debate, tried one last time to redirect the conversation. But Conway seized the opportunity again, her voice rising above the commotion. "You call yourself a fighter, Congresswoman, but let's face facts. You've achieved nothing. You shout, you tweet, you trend for 5 minutes, and then it's gone. That's not leadership, that's noise." The remark drew murmurs from the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others restless with anticipation. Conway straightened her shoulders, convinced she had landed the final blow. Her supporters cheered, sensing Crockett was cornered, but Crockett was waiting. She let Conway's words hang in the air, then leaned into her microphone with a calmness that cut sharper than anger. "Kellyanne, you're right about one thing. I do make noise. But the difference is, when I make noise, people wake up. When you speak, people tune out, because all they hear is an echo of a man who used you and left you with nothing but his lies." The audience gasped. The shot was direct, piercing not only Conway's arguments, but her legacy as Donald Trump's loyal defender. Conway's expression froze, the confidence draining as the crowd erupted. Cheers thundered across the stage. Viewers at home rushed to rewind their streams, replaying the line again and again. Conway tried to fire back, her voice sharpened into a near shout. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare try to lecture me on loyalty! I stood in the fire when others ran!" But her words were drowned out by the applause swelling around Crockett. The moderators pleaded for order, but the room was already lost. Crockett pressed forward, her voice ringing above the chaos. "You talk about loyalty, but loyalty to what? To power? To lies? To a man who mocked the very people you claim to protect? I'm loyal to truth. I'm loyal to justice. And no amount of spin, no amount of smirks will change that tonight." The roar was deafening. Conway's face reddened as the camera zoomed in, capturing every flicker of her expression. The viral moment had arrived, and Crockett owned it completely. Her words, unscripted and raw, sliced through the noise and crystallized into a phrase that instantly began trending across social media. "When I make noise, people wake up." Within minutes, clips spread across platforms. Memes flooded Twitter. TikTok creators spliced Crockett's one-liner with reaction videos, dancing, cheers, and captions celebrating her comeback. Hashtags like #CrockettClapback and #ViralDebate trended worldwide. In the spin rooms backstage, analysts scrambled. Pundits on live television marveled at the speed of the reaction, declaring the debate no longer about policy but about Crockett's moment of triumph. Commentators compared it to the most legendary debate comebacks in political history, a single phrase that defined not just the night, but potentially a career. For Conway, the twist was brutal. What she had planned as a humiliation had flipped into a humiliation of her own. She had delivered the opening blow, but Crockett had turned it into the knockout. The strategist known for her mastery of narrative had been undone by a congresswoman who wielded conviction like a weapon. The climax was undeniable. Conway's attempt to silence her opponent had detonated into Crockett's viral ascendancy, and the night was far from over. As the debate wound down, the moderators struggled to regain control, but the night's defining moment had already been sealed. Conway sat rigid, her earlier smirk replaced by a tight smile that barely held together. Crockett, meanwhile, leaned back with the calm confidence of someone who knew she had shifted the ground beneath her feet. The closing statements became an afterthought. Conway spoke about experience, about loyalty, about her years in the trenches of American politics. But the audience no longer heard her words as they once did. Every sentence seemed overshadowed by the echo of Crockett's viral comeback. Online, Conway's speech was clipped into background noise, the focus entirely on her opponent's sharpest lines. When it was Crockett's turn to close, she didn't waste time. Her voice was steady, deliberate, and each word carried the weight of the night. I know politics can feel like theater, but tonight, you've seen the difference between a script and the truth. I don't need to play a part. I don't need to perform loyalty to power. I speak for the people who are tired of being silenced, tired of being lied to, and ready to demand better. If that makes me loud, then I will stay loud, because silence never saved anyone. The hall erupted. It was no longer applause. It was a standing ovation. Conway forced her own smile, clapping faintly as the cameras caught the stark contrast. One woman lifted by the crowd, the other trapped in its judgment. Outside the debate hall, the ripple spread instantly. News anchors broke into programming with live coverage. Commentators replayed Crockett's line again and again, dissecting the power of her words. Twitter exploded with threads declaring the night a turning point. Hashtags multiplied, climbing the trending lists within minutes. TikTok stitched Crockett's lines into montages of cheers, applause, and even street interviews with viewers declaring her the winner by a landslide. Conway's allies tried damage control. They went on television insisting that viral moments didn't equal substance. They argued Crockett was a creature of spectacle, not leadership. But the spin fell flat. The momentum was irreversible. Crockett's words had already carved themselves into the collective memory of the night. In the days that followed, the moment refused to fade. Opinion pieces called Crockett's comeback a political earthquake. Late-night shows replayed her one-liner as punchlines turned applause lines. Grassroots groups lifted her words as slogans, printing them on signs and sharing them in online campaigns. What had begun as a calculated attempt by Conway to humiliate her opponent had backfired so completely that it now symbolized the fragility of old political power against a new, unapologetic voice. For Jasmine Crockett, the debate was more than a victory. It was proof that truth spoken boldly could not only survive an attack, but transform it into strength. For Kellyanne Conway, it was a reminder that even the sharpest strategist can be undone when the narrative slips from her grasp. And for America, it was a moment that captured the volatility of politics today. How a single phrase, spoken in the right moment, could ignite millions, redefine reputations, and shift the balance of power in ways no one could have predicted. When the lights dimmed and the stage emptied, one truth remained clear. Crockett's voice had not only survived Conway's attempt at humiliation, it had risen above it, louder, stronger, and unforgettable.